joining us for the latest in our series, Exploring Performance Management in 2024. I'm Roly Walter, founder of Appraisd, the employee performance management platform. And Appraisd is designed to help managers and employees get the very best from each other, getting feedback on how they're doing, getting alignment on their objectives, and clarity on opportunities for personal development and growth. But today we're going to be focusing on promotion and bonus decisions. And I'm delighted to be joined by Amira Kohler. Now, Amira has 30 years of consulting experience in all areas of performance management, developing processes, delivering performance management systems, training managers and employees in a huge number of organizations, from HSBC to small startups. She has her own consultancy, People Stuff, which helps organizations large and small to get their people stuff right. Welcome, Amira. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you, Roly. Very nice to be here.
It's a pleasure. It's great to have you. So we're going to dive straight in, if that's all right. I've got 4 challenging questions for you. Well, they'll be challenging for me, but easy for you probably. So I'm going to go straight in, if that's okay. Okay. And the first one we're going to start with is, how can you ensure that promotion and bonus structures are fair, transparent, and aligned with employee performance and contributions? Because that's what we all want, right? As employees, we want to know that everything is fair and transparent, and that there's some kind of process or system in place that means that I'm going to be rewarded for the stuff that I do in the same way that everyone else is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so for me, Roly, I think there are 3 key things here. So, firstly, ensuring that decisions are fundamentally fair, balanced, and not biased, and it's a level playing field. Secondly, that managers are competent and confident to make those decisions and to stand by them. So, setting managers up for success, basically. And thirdly, that everyone understands the factors that are being taken into account. So it's transparent and meritocratic. So delving into each of these a bit deeper. So the first one, how to make it sure that decisions are fair, balanced, and not biased. This is a really key one because
Mm,
unconscious bias can skew decision making, which obviously can disadvantage a certain group, um, unnecessarily. And the whole point is it's unconscious bias because we're all biased. We're biased
mm.
without knowing it, because of our upbringing, because of our belief system, because of the people that we have always lived around. So bias isn't something that we can necessarily hugely control, but we do need to be aware of it, in relation to performance management decisions that
Yeah.
affect really important things like reward and promotion, etc. And I was talking just the other day at International Women's Day, and it was really in relation to that. I did a couple of, I did some research, and I found some really interesting things about, for instance, how unconscious bias can affect females in relation to performance management. Because for
Mm.
2 reasons, there's lots. I'm sure there's lots, but 2 key ones. So women have a tendency to underrate themselves, to underestimate their performance, and men, sorry guys, do overestimate their performance. And that can be really critical in relation to, for instance, self-appraisal. So
Yeah.
if because a lot of organizations have, and I think it's a very good thing, moved to a place where it's not simply the manager, a single manager who decides all these critical decisions, but
Mm.
the employee might contribute to it by self-rating themselves. But obviously, if that employee is not it is underestimating their performance in relation to somebody else who might see exactly the same level of performance but think that they've done a brilliant job, that can be really, that can be very consequential if it relates to then
Yeah.
that decision goes into pay or promotion. So that's one thing to be aware of.
Mm.
And the second one, which I found really interesting, was a piece of research by Harvard Business Review that have found that women are 1.4 times more likely than men to receive subjective critical feedback, and
Mm.
what, as opposed to the opposite, which is objective positive feedback.
Yeah.
So so the example of this that was given was someone independent had gone and looked at a manager interacting with two members of staff who did exactly the same role and actually had very similar personality traits. And whilst the woman was told that she had analysis paralysis, the man was told that he was careful and considered in his approach.
Oh dear.
I know. And it was just
Yeah.
really interesting that what, their research proved was there can be a genuine
Mm.
consequential difference in the way that males and females are given and receive feedback.
Yeah.
So so I think, and you can imagine how that could play into, feedback again is one of the factors that should be taken into account in making these kind of decisions. But I guess it's very, very critical. And I think what I would say to try and, you know, give a little mnemonic about how to handle this is
Yeah.
think about the ABCD. So A and B, think about awareness of bias, because obviously, as I said, you don't know what your subliminal biases are, but if you can be aware of them and maybe remind yourself about those kind of
Mm.
words that might appear, like paralysis to, analysis paralysis,
Yeah.
then you can potentially, hopefully, you know, not fall into that not fall into that trap. So ABCD, awareness of bias. C is coaching conversations. So having managers be really equipped, which I'll come on to in a second, to behave as a supportive and objective and human
Mm. Yeah.
manager, who can coach, good, great sort of relationship from their
Yeah.
employee. And finally, the D, data, because all of this should be able to be critiqued through data. So
Yeah.
if you have a system like Appraisd, for instance, which obviously is brilliant at collating data throughout a performance period, then you can use that data to check whether there is bias in the ratings
Mm.
of men versus women, or maybe ethnic minorities, or any other,
Yeah.
outlier, and check, for instance, in promotion, are there far more men being promoted than women? What
Mm.
about female returners? What about ethnic minorities, etc.? So data is your double check, really, to
Yeah.
find out whether what's actually going on.
Yeah. I think that just picking up on I absolutely agree. And yeah, the more objective we can make it, that's the aim, right? To make it also makes it easier for the managers because they have to, they don't have to try and pull together something from the back of their mind about some sort of assessment of an individual based on some sort of data in their own head that may be very scarce. And actually, what you really want is to look at something on a piece of paper, ideally, and say, why don't you reflect on this, and how do you how do you want to grow in these areas, and how can I support you as your line manager slash coach?
Absolutely, absolutely, because I think this the horror story of the annual, kind of appraisal where everyone has to
Mm.
scrabble around collecting
Yeah.
and trying to remember evidence
Mm.
from, that long period of time, was always it was unsettling for both
Yes.
the employee and the
Yeah.
manager. So if they can have, there can be a sort of bank of information that they can look back at, because they've got a system where they have collated that information, and there's been a kind of, repository of of evidence that has been piling up over the time. That's much better for both the manager and the employee, to be honest, because the manager is often feeling very squeamish going into that conversation, thinking,
Mm.
I've got to justify what I'm about to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Of course.
don't want to be in that position either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So on the managers, so I said there were three things. So we're talking about the
Yeah.
fair, balanced decision making and not biased. The second is that managers are confident to make these decisions and stand by them.
Mm.
So I think there's just a couple of things in that. I think train managers or educate managers on how to lead good conversations, where they behave as the performance coach where appropriate, not purely as the directive boss. And
Mm,
those two
mm.
things can be quite different, because again, sometimes in the past, performance management felt like the manager was expected to have all the answers, to be this omnipotent sort of power
Mm,
that just handed it out almost like the judge and jury.
mm.
And sometimes a manager has to, has to take the
Yeah.
lead, absolutely, particularly if somebody is veering off performance or it's underperforming. But generally, in a lot of situations, I do think if a manager can behave as a more as a coach to really kind of facilitate a good conversation and have a very adult to adult relationship
Mm,
with that employee, both of them will do so much better out of it.
yeah.
But the other thing I'd say about that is, being a manager is a tough job.
Mm,
There's a lot on their plate. So really help them get it right. So the kind of tools and guides that I know that are on Appraisd are just great, because they really help a manager to kind of almost revise for this stuff like they were going into an
yeah.
exam.
Yeah.
and and have, for instance, conversation prompts. What should I be asking
Mm,
in this meeting? What should I be covering, so that they are, they're equipped to succeed rather than scared and sort of a bit put off, which is probably when unconscious bias might slip in, etc., etc. And then the last thing about making sure that everyone understands the factors that are being taken into account. So I think this one is really simple, because you've an organization and a manager should be able to inform their employee and their team what factors are going to be taken into account for that promotion decision, or that paid, that reward decision, the bonus decision, etc. So, for instance, are they going to base the decision purely on past performance, or would future potential be taken into account?
mm,
Is it only about what was achieved? Did the person achieve their objectives and their KPIs, or is it also, is the way in which somebody went about their role, the how,
mm,
does that play into those decisions? Those kind of things about what a manager will take into account when allocating the the rating, or the performance bonus, or the decide about promotion. All of those ought to be explicit, and so that everyone knows what criteria they're kind of being judged against, I guess.
yeah. Great. Okay. So, and I'm thinking especially in a rapidly changing business environment, but what are the key considerations in deciding when and how to promote employees?
So I think the answer to this, there can't be a single answer, as I'm
Mm.
sure is, because organizations are vary enormously. So I think it's very contextual depending on the type of organization. So, for instance, in a very structured or larger organization that may have a very clear career ladder, and, for instance, do a set promotion round every year, because people are moving up the ladder, and you kind of, everyone knows that it's that time of the year when someone will go into the more, will move up that into slots that have been made vacant. Then I think that's one type of organization. That's quite different to smaller, more dynamic um, organizations
Mm.
where they're more rapidly maybe evolving,
Yeah.
and that kind of
Yeah.
structure would just be, unnecessary and bureaucratic. And in which case, if it's more organic than that, you often have promotion occurring in a much more fluid way, simply because an individual has almost grown into a larger, able to take on more responsibility, and their role has, therefore, they can step into what is a bigger role because of their own personal development and growth. So there are two kind of, I suppose, different extremes of the different types of ways in which organisations might have a promotional process. In either case, I would suggest that a manager needs to ask themselves a series of questions. And I think the questions probably don't vary well, I think the questions are pretty applicable regardless of the type
Yeah.
of organization. So one question is really fundamentally, is this person ready for promotion right now, in the short term, maybe 3 to 6 months, or maybe slightly longer term, 1 to 2 years? Secondly, is if you thought this person was a flight risk, if you feared that they might be looking alternatively for another role, would you do everything possible to retain them? Would
Yeah.
you really fight to keep this person with all the, whatever it is at your disposal that you could use to try and keep them? Thirdly, really and critically, what is that individual's career preference themselves? Because I used to be head of talent management at Barclays, and we had a fascinating piece of, we did some research that we thought, the managers often thought that they believed that they knew what that individual wanted, and that everybody was highly aspirational and ambitious, and they all wanted to be promoted and get to the very most senior levels, etc. Actually, what we found was that the preference of some individuals wasn't that. They wanted to grow, and they wanted to be given responsibility and kudos, but that might be in a sideways move in a project or in another part of that team, so that they could expand their skill set, but not, for instance, and this was Barclays, so it was obviously a very global organization, not have to travel, not have to be the one who goes on a big hairy project in another part of the world. They discovered that some people, they assumed that they wanted that, but actually it didn't suit their personal circumstances and the time of their life, etc. So I think the third question, as I said, is ask the individual what promotion and career growth looks to them at that period in their life,
Yeah.
because it can change enormously throughout someone's career. It's 40-50 year career. It's pretty there are lots of different stages in that
Absolutely.
career. And then the last one is really considering, as a manager, what are their development areas, and how can I help bridge them? So, if they're not ready quite yet, but they will be ready at some point in time, for what reason? What's the experiential moment that I need to give them? What is it about people management responsibility? Is it about running a balance sheet? Is it about some logistical project that I need them to do, etc., etc., so that you've really got them ready for when, depending on, as I said, the type of organization, when that role is going to become available.
Great. It reminds me actually of a book I read, which is actually bit of a cult classic in the entrepreneurial world, called Traction by Gino Wickman. I don't know if you've come across it, where he talks about getting the right people into the right seats, and people happy and productive and motivated when they're in the right seat. And to figure out if someone is in the right seat or should move into a particular seat, he asks 3 questions. Does that person get it? Like, do they understand what it is going to involve? Do they want it? Are they going to find it motivating? Is that what they want in in this stage in their life, as you alluded to? And then the third one is, do they have the capacity to do it? So do they have these skills and that they may have built up through experience, to be able to fulfill that role as well, which it's quite a neat way of thinking about it. Get it, want it, capacity to do it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's kind of similar.
One of the most interesting, when I was, just a little
Yeah.
anecdote, when I was, a few years ago, I worked for a company called Nomad Foods, that was a frozen food company. And I remember being part of a conversation where a lady was coming back from maternity leave, and there was an assumption that she wouldn't want the promotion that was kind of available at that time, because she was coming back. She was, the assumption was she'll need to at least be, she won't want to be more senior. She'll want to stay at the same level.
Yeah.
And she predicted that this would be the conversation. So she got in touch with her manager and said, just in case you're
Yeah.
looking at promotion rounds while I'm away, just to say, I'm not going to be the key child carer. My husband is the one who is actually going to take a step back. He's going to go part-time. I'm coming back full-time. And I am absolutely at the top of my game right now. So
Yeah.
please do not withhold promotion from me. Um, and it was so interesting because
That's really
she was
good.
absolutely right that they
Yeah.
were going to have that conversation and they
Yeah.
were going to make all sorts of assumptions that would have been wrong, which is fascinating. So, like, oh, all credit.
Very good. Yeah. Well, actually, talking of anecdotes, I was gonna ask you if you've got any examples that you could share of any innovative approaches, or maybe not even innovative, just really great approaches to reward and recognition that have created the right effect, which is this kind of positive impact on motivation and loyalty, and kind of engagement.
Yeah, well, so I think the first thing I would say before going into the example is
Mm,
that it's, I think, really critical to decouple performance measurement from regular performance conversations.
yeah.
So, and although I think that sounds like a good idea, I'm still surprised how many organizations don't do that.
Right.
They
Yeah.
they lump it in. They do the annual, the annual
Mm,
performance
mm,
review, whatever,
yeah.
and then at the end they kind of, the person says, so what have I got? What's my rating?
Yeah.
Which basically means that they haven't really been concentrating on anything
Yes.
else during the entire conversation. All they have been listening out for is,
Yeah.
what rating are you going to give me? Because I know that that is fundamentally going to go into some sort of sausage machine, and I'm going to end up with a particular, you
Yeah.
know.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And it also, not surprisingly, means that you'd have to be a bit of a mug to declare your, development areas or the things that you learnt from. Well, you could probably just about get away with that terminology, but
Yeah.
anything that's just a bit kind of like, I didn't do that as well as I should have done. It's like, you wouldn't go there, would you?
It's
You'd
like
have
the
to be
interview thing, isn't it? You say, I
exactly,
promise
yeah,
next year I'll
exactly,
try
yeah.
harder to
I'm
be less
such
of
a
a
perfectionist,
perfectionist. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly. So yes, first principle, decouple performance conversation from performance
Yeah.
measurement. Have it
Yeah.
either at a different meeting, ideally at a different time of the year.
Absolutely.
Um,
Mm.
so that's one thing. And then I'd say for me, and I have been talking about this for some time, and I know a few organisations that have adopted this, but for me, it's something that I think is a really a, a, a great way to for an organization to think about how to measure performance, okay, and to not fall into some of the bear traps that
Mm.
cause everyone to have such an allergic, toxic reaction to the whole idea of performance management. And that is to have a simple rating scale that is only three possibilities: on track, exceptional, or off track. Okay.
Yeah.
And rather than the ratings
Yeah. The
1 to 5
5 point
or the
scale. Yeah.
met performance and the didn't meet performance, etc., and all those performance scales. And the reason why I think, so I'll describe it a little bit. So the reason why I feel quite strongly about this is because most employees are doing a good job most of the time and are really
Mm.
fundamental to an organization's
Yeah.
success. Okay. So this idea um, that performance ratings are ever going to that it is appropriate to try and kind of differentiate between that majority of people, and that it's going to motivate them to be told that they were this shade of grey versus that shade
Yeah.
of grey. It's like that's just a
Mm.
misinterpretation, I think, of how humans are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Having said that, It only works if the vast majority of people are on track. Okay. And on
Yeah.
track basically means you are doing what we ask you to do and you're doing it really well. And we really acknowledge and respect how much value you add to this organization. So in order for this kind of to work, you've probably got to have around 80% of people, 4 out of 5, the vast majority of people who are doing a very good, fantastic day-to-day job that everyone respects.
Yeah.
You can't have the on track only being a minority. They've got to be the vast majority, which I think, in my experience, is how it tends to be. Then what you are able to do as a manager is focus on the outliers. So there are always going to be some exceptional performers who
Yeah.
really do go the extra mile, who really do embody the way in which you want stuff to be done. They are collaborative. They get results through people, not against people. They are pushing all the boundaries, achieving all their objectives. They are, and most people, and I've done this, if you ask them, who are the exceptional performers? They don't think that's me. They
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
oh, that's
That
Julie.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, because she's the one who, if you're gonna pick out one person in this team, who's the person who really, really goes the extra mile, who
Yeah.
people want to be on a team with? It's
Mm.
Julie. They don't generally think that's me. Um, well, they might do if they are Julie, but you see what I mean. Um, and those individuals really do need special care because they are they're demanding, they want to be challenged, they want further progression, they expect higher reward, and you need to do that because otherwise you'll lose these very,
Yeah.
very critical performers. But the other key thing about this is that you also focus, which I think is also to the detriment of many organizations, on the underperformers, on those on those not rare, but those probably 5 to 10% on the
Mm.
average, but
Mm.
it will vary, who actually really are holding back the team, who
Yeah.
other people kind of don't really want to work with because they kind of know that they're going to have
Mm.
to do a bit of their job as well. Um, and the manager needs the time to focus on those two extremes. And they
Yeah.
have got that time back by not having to pore over
Yeah. Choose
hideous
between a
kind
3
of,
and a 4. Yeah.
yeah, and then having to think, how am I going to justify
Yeah.
it?
Yep.
So I've really I have seen this work in some organizations. I
Mm.
think the reason why more don't do it is because it's just not perceived to be the way in which to do it.
That's right. Yeah.
But when they do, I think they're really amazed by how life enhancing it
Yeah.
can be.
Exactly.
a-
Yeah. Makes
as
life
long
better for
as, and this is
everyone.
critical, as long as that 80%, the ones that
Yeah.
are having some time to understand, for their manager to understand them at an individual level. So don't
Mm.
lump them together as the 80% and then not talk to them.
Mm.
The idea is you're on track, you're doing a fabulous job. Acknowledge that and how valuable that is to the organization. Don't just leave them to
Yeah.
not talk
Exactly.
to at all. But focus primarily on the extremes would be my sort of thing,
Exactly.
whether
Yeah.
it's innovative, but it's definitely not as common as I would like it to be.
Well, exactly. That's exactly right. It's not as common as it should be. And I think, yeah, one of the things just to go with it is you can build up a really good narrative around that rating scale, and you can say a good company should be able to come up with a way of describing what on track means that in a
Yes.
way that is motivational and um, encouraging for all of those people that are, like you say, they're doing a great job and they're going to be looked after. They're going to progress, and yeah, they're doing great. You need to kind of really spell it out in a kind of a decent narrative, I think, for
Yeah.
those people.
And actually, I've got some questions that could be asked, and I
Oh
think in
yeah,
the Appraisd system you could actually,
yeah.
have you could ask these 5 questions.
Mm.
has this person made an exceptional, and that's the key word, exceptional, impact over and above their objectives and their job description consistently throughout the year? So exceptional being the word. Secondly, have they consistently demonstrated the organisation's values and behaviours? So the way in which they've gone about it, not just what they've done. Thirdly, if yes to both those questions, should they receive an extra discretionary bonus, over and above the general kind of, the norm? Thirdly, so that's if it relates to bonus. Thirdly, if it relates to promotion, are they ready to be promoted right now? And lastly, is there anything else that should be considered before making any sort of decision about in relation to this? So that's so I think and they don't have to be the exact questions, but all I'm saying is a manager can be asked a series of questions to really try and demarcate the individuals
make it easier to answer the final question.
And it might be that they say, some people might say, well, those are subjective questions, and there is some truth in that. Less so if they have got, as we said, that body of evidence that they have built up and feedback that is there to look at, of
That's right.
feedback from everybody else, etc., etc. But the point is, always that rating and ranking was subjective. And sometimes people have this impression of false objectivity because a number makes it look objective, when it came down to it, a manager was always deciding that awful thing of, was it a 3.5 or a 4? So it's not true that these questions are necessarily any less, any more subjective than anything else. So
but they are easier to answer, I think, for a manager, and it's easier for them to be more decisive. I think one of the big complaints from managers about the old style appraisal with the 1 to 5 scale at the end of it is the time, or maybe even just kind of mental energy going into trying to decide whether someone is a 3 or a 4.
Totally.
And that was one of the biggest complaints. So cutting that out, I think, and it will go down very well.
Well, Deloitte, just to say, Deloitte did some research back in 2015 when they worked out that they were spending 2 million hours a year rating each employee's performance and potential, collating the ratings, discussing them, calibrating them, and yet, despite all of that huge investment of time and effort, there was actually very little correlation between the ratings and actual empirical performance. So let's save the time.
Excellent. Okay, one more question for you then, which is, we've been talking a lot about individuals and individual achievements and how you assess, motivate, reward people. But how do you weigh this up when you're looking at teams and the individuals within them? A collaborative team, obviously, you can, when people are kind of working together in a team and they're enjoying it, they're collaborating, that can be a wonderful thing, highly motivational and productive for everyone involved. So how do you balance that out with the achievements of a specific individual?
No, it's a really good question, because it is, you can accidentally, you can say the words, we believe in team performance and individual performance, but actually kind of, there is some truth that you get what you pay for. So you need to be conscious of not just the messaging, but also the action. So I think 3 things that I would say would make a real difference. Firstly, to communicate the importance of teamwork and to celebrate quite publicly the kind of heroes who everyone knows are the people who are demonstrating achieving results in a collaborative manner, not the opposite. And it's surprising, I think, how often organizations say, you know, we believe in teamwork, but actually the people who are getting on are the rabidly individual performers who
Mm,
are doing it to the disbenefit of their colleagues,
mm.
their reports. You know, they're claiming all of the, um,
Yeah.
credit for all of their team's performance. So when you have, yeah, so that's the first thing. Be really put your money where your mouth is, and kind of celebrate and out kind of acknowledge and reward those heroes who are genuinely
Mm,
collaborative. Secondly, I would say I've just talked about 5 questions that you could ask to understand individual performance. If every manager also had, in that series of questions that they had to ask themselves, the question of whether an individual has been a collaborative team member and has kind of contributed to team performance, then I think what would be clear is that that is what matters. You know, it's not just, you can't do it at the to the disbenefit of everybody
yeah.
else. And the last, which is probably the way you put your money where your mouth is how you allocate the bonus pot. So if an organization allocates a chunk of the reward pot for team-based performance,
Hmm.
as well as individual performance, so then it's clear that
Yeah.
absolutely matters. So you could have a team that it has outperformed another team where they get a bigger chunk,
Mm,
and that be as a different part of the pot than
yeah.
individual
Yeah.
performance. You know, there's lots of different ways that this can
Yeah.
be done, because I know some organizations will decide whether a particular market has
Mm,
outperformed another,
mm,
and therefore they've got a bigger chunk of the pot. So depending
yeah.
on how the reward structure is put together, you can absolutely, kind of underline that team-based pay isn't just words, it's actually
Mm, yeah.
meaningful through money.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, Amira, thank you so much. I think that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome.
Now, where can people find you if they want to hear a bit more from you and find out how to get hold of you?
I think probably the easiest thing is to look me up on LinkedIn.
Yep.
I don't think there's any other Amira Kohlers, so it's Amira Kohler is Kohler, and my company is People Stuff. And yeah, if you look me up on LinkedIn, I would love to connect, and you will see a bit more about what I do.